Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to week number 5 in CU101. We are over a third of the way through this class. So way to go. Everybody give yourselves a pat on the back for that. Fantastic. I hope you're still enjoying your experience, kind of settling into the groove of that time management that's required to get all this stuff done. Hopefully a little bit of the shock of like, oh, like this is actually work, right? Is starting to wear off a little bit. But we are going to ramp it up as promised this week in week number 5. So we've got some more time consuming, not necessarily more difficult, but more time consuming projects this week. As were mentioned in the video I sent out earlier today, and we'll go over those in some good depth this evening and talk to you about best strategies for getting this all done in a timely fashion and all that sort of stuff as well. But before we get into that, I do want to mention just real briefly, I know I talked about we were almost done with it last week, but conditional enrollment technically is pretty much over, but if you've heard from me specifically about some projects that you need to get done, then we need to get those done quick, fast, in a hurry to make sure that you get to join us next week for week number 6, all right? But if you have not heard from me specifically about that, then you're good to go, all right? So, whoo, all right, don't worry about that. So before we get into week 5, let's reflect quickly on week number 4. Chef Jackie, how'd we look with the fresh pasta?
We looked good. This is my favorite week. Well, I can't say that. I like every week, and I think you'll hear me say that every week, almost. But fresh pasta is one of my favorite weeks because I love making it so much. So I love looking at and seeing what everybody produces. It really is fun to see the different approaches almost to the same recipe, to the same techniques. And most of the time it comes out. I know a lot of people had to make pasta more than once. That's okay. It's almost to be expected because as much as we give you ratios that work out 90% of the time, that 90 grams of flour to 1 egg, if you're me and you're in Arizona, the air is drier. I might need a little bit more moisture. I might need a little bit more water. I might need another drop of oil compared to someone, say, back east in Florida, which has just been hit with an insane amount of rain and it's been humid for all the time. So that's where the difference lies. But I really love this week because everybody's got to get their hands dirty. You have to dive in there and get your hands dirty. This is the first week where you break down chicken with no gloves on, and then you're making your pasta, you're getting your hands dirty. But I really liked what I saw. Piece of advice, when you're kneading your pasta dough, we say 15 minutes, and yes, you do need to go for 15 minutes. But if when you get to 15 minutes, you look at it and there's some different color specks in there, need it a little bit longer. You might need a little sprinkle more of water. That color should be consistent. It should be that sort of slightly darker than eggshell color when it's done. John, yes, you can over knead it, but it's very hard to do. You would have to put it in like a stand mixer with a dough hook for half an hour. I've never done it. I've seen pasta dough come out tough because you worked too much flour in, but that's not from over kneading it.
Yeah, if you're doing it by hand, you will get too tired to knead before you will over knead it.
Your dough might get tough because you worked a little too much flour in, but it's not because you've over kneaded it. I am a fan of dump the flour on the counter, make your well, put the eggs in it, and I use a fork. Chef Luke, I know, uses his fingers, and you just work it in until it comes together. Then you start kneading. You might get to the point where there's extra flour on the board or on your table, and that's okay. If it doesn't need to take all of it in so it's not sticky anymore, but it's that texture, that luscious texture we're looking for, stop. I don't measure out my flour when I make pasta. I just dump a whole lot of it on the board, make my well, and incorporate till I like my texture. And you'll get to that point when you've done this for 15 years. So But really nice job this week. Alfredo sauce, beautiful job. I think every other narrative I read, somebody was saying, I used to use cream cheese for my Alfredo, which, yes, that is the don't break it version. That's the we want it smooth and creamy and we don't want to break it version. I have seen restaurants that do it when they make it in like a 5-gallon vat. I don't like it that way. I'd still rather make it to order or almost to order ahead of time. I've seen it made in, gallon vats in the restaurant industry. The trick was don't put in the butter. I've seen restaurants go straight cream and garlic and then finish it with the cheese. And because there's no additional fat in it, it doesn't separate out. It works. Again, not my favorite way to do it. Do it to order. You saw it. It takes 5 minutes. When you drop pasta, make Alfredo. Just do it to order. It comes out so much better. As long as your cheese is grated, you're good to go. And tomato sauce. I was very appreciative of how many people didn't tell me they didn't like it because it didn't taste like marinara. Yeah. I think we emphasized that enough last week that it's not going to taste the same, and I liked that a lot. But really nice job following these techniques, really showing me what I need to see. One caveat, just for assignments in general, please submit full assignments. So if you're going to do it over several days, that's fine. But don't submit your Alfredo and then submit your pasta and then submit your tomato sauce. Put all your pictures in the folder, hold on to it, and then when everything's in there, then send me that folder, narrative included. So you got to budget your time to make sure it still gets in by Tuesday, but don't submit me piece by piece because it actually you'll see that you're not going to like the grade when it comes through after that first small submission because it's not complete. So it'll be like a 40. We don't want that. Hold up, put everything in that folder, submit the whole folder, please, once it's completed. But overall this week, really nice job on pasta, Alfredo, and tomato. It's not a hard week, but it is a lot of work. So nice job getting it done.
Yeah, I got some really cool comments I liked. I had one student write in and say they did not like Fresh Pasta Week because now their wife will never eat dried pasta again, so they got to make fresh pasta all the time. I thought that one was really good. Someone sent me a note and said that they used the tomato sauce as an ingredient in their Irish stew, where they usually use tomato paste, but they use the tomato sauce, and it added so much more depth because you have those other ingredients in there, right? Tomato paste is just super concentrated tomato, but that tomato sauce, you've got all those other ingredients, those other flavors. It's cooked for that amount of time, so it's got all those extra layers. And when you use that as an ingredient in something else, it adds even more depth. So some really cool notes. I love it when you guys give us that feedback about, you're obviously doing it in your narrative every week, talking about what you liked and that kind of stuff. But when you shoot us over those extra notes, I really like hearing what because I don't get to see all the narratives. So it's cool for me to get some notes from you guys about, what you enjoyed and what you're doing with this stuff. It's pretty cool. So I'm glad for the most part you guys enjoyed it. Show of hands, how many people was this the first time eating fresh pasta? A lot. How many first time making fresh pasta? Right. Okay, a lot more. Cool, awesome. Well, hopefully you enjoyed it. Hopefully it's something you wanna keep trying and keep doing. I know my kiddos, they're 2 and 6, so they're really starting to get interested in what Dad's doing in the kitchen. So if you can get, like I said last week, get that free labor to help you with the kneading process or the mixing process, go for it. This is also a fun thing to do with your friends. I've done that a few times, had friends over for dinner, and they're like, what are we having? I'm like, well, we're having pasta. I'm like, okay, cool. And I'm like, all right, so roll up your sleeves because we're going to make it. And they're like, what? And you get into it, and it's fun. It's a cool activity. Everybody gets 90 grams of flour and an egg, and mix it up and let's get after it. So everybody really gets into it, and it's a lot of fun. So try sharing that technique with your friends and family for a little something new and different. This week, we like I said, we're going to take it up a notch. We are going to be making stock from scratch. We're going to then use that stock to make a soup and another mother sauce. All right. So let's talk first about stock. A big question a lot of people have is, what's the difference between broth and stock, right? They're both generally used as bases for soups and sauces and that sort of stuff. Broth oftentimes can be consumed by itself, okay? It's usually seasoned, and that's a big difference, right? Stock is never seasoned, all right? So when you go to taste this stock after it's finished, you're going to go, it tastes real chickeny, but it's very bland. Yeah, it's supposed to be, and we'll talk about why. But another big reason, or another big difference between stock and broth is that stock is made with bones and broth is made with meat on bones. Okay, so that's your big difference. So if if you make chicken and dumplings, like maybe you like to use the whole chicken method, right? Where you just put a chicken in a pot, fill it with water, cook it till that chicken is shreddable, right? You get that chicken out of there. Well, that liquid you have left in there, that's a broth. That's a super flavorful chicken broth, okay? Not a stock. A stock is done with bones. And then we add some other aromatic ingredients to flavor it a little bit differently. We're going to keep it super classic this week, but I'll talk about some ways you can do that a little differently. When we talk about stock, we're generally talking about two different types of stock. There's vegetable stock and there's seafood stock as well. But for the most part, when you're talking about stock, you're talking about white stock versus brown stock. A common misconception is that all chicken stock is white stock and all beef stock is brown stock. And that's simply not the case. Okay? What differentiates white stock from brown stock is whether or not the bones are roasted in the stock. Okay? When we talk about white stock, we're using unroasted bones. Okay, they're raw, just straight up, ready to go bones. Whether that's chicken bones, beef bones, veal bones, whatever it is, they're uncooked. When you make a brown stock, you roast the bones. And what that does, obviously, is add some depth of flavor because those bones, even if they don't have much or any meat on them, they're still going to cook. Okay, some of the water is going to come out, but they're also going to leach out some of their collagen, some of their fat, those sort of things that can help flavor the stock. So we're kind of trading some of those traits for the depth of flavor that we get from the roasted stock, from the roasted bones. And that's going to color your stock brown, obviously. And it's delicious, got a great depth of flavor. If you've ever had like a French onion soup, which is something you guys will be making later in this program, that's a brown stock. It's a deep, rich brown stock. But it's not quite as viscous as a white stock will be. Because when we're using unroasted bones, uncooked raw bones, those bones have in them collagen and cartilage.
I gotta get it from the back.
Hang on a sec.
I got it, I think.
Got it? All right, cool. So where those joints connect, right, those are the desirable pieces that we want to have because we want that cartilage that connects those bones together, because that cartilage, as it cooks, it releases collagen into the water, and that gives that water flavor, but also mouthfeel. So that's when I said viscous. Viscous means something that's a little bit thicker, right? So think about the difference between taking a drink of water and a drink of milk. Okay, so you know how the milk kind of coats your mouth a little bit. It's a little bit heavier on your tongue than the water is. That's mouthfeel. That's what you get when you're able to add, kind of change the chemical makeup of the liquid and thicken it, right? In this case, we talked about reduction last week. We're not reducing the stock to thicken it, right? We're adding in this collagen from the bones that's going to thicken the stock a little bit. Now it's still going to be pourable, right? It's not going to like stand up in a spoon if you pick it up, unless you get a lot of collagen and it's super cold, and then it will gelatinize. I don't know if you saw the video I sent out today. If your stock has a lot of collagen in it, When it gels, or when it cools, it will gel, like Jello, right? That's Jello comes from gelatin, which comes from collagen and cartilage. That's where that comes from. And that's actually a desirable trait for your chilled stock. It's something it's kind of weird at first, but when you realize how delicious it is, once you've reached that point, how much viscosity that adds to whatever that stock goes into, then you realize how desirable it is. That's something that we like to have. So that's why when we do our stock with raw bones, we want to use cold water. Now, you don't necessarily have to ice down your water or anything like that, but when we're getting the water in there, some people want to use hot water to speed up the process. That's not what we want to do. We want to use cold water, cold tap water on those raw bones, because the longer that water takes to come up to a simmer, the more of that collagen and gelatin it will extract from those bones. Okay. I did have one question from a student earlier. Remember, you were supposed to save your carcass and wings from week 2, right, in a bag in the freezer. Well, now we're going to get those out. As a general rule, you never want to cook frozen food, right? You always want to thaw it out before you cook it. This is the one rare case where it's all right to start with the frozen product, okay? Because again, the cold start will help us extract more collagen. Now, that's not to say that if you need to go out and buy fresh bones that you need to freeze them first. It's not going to make that much difference. But what I'm saying is that if you want to go straight into the stock pot with the frozen bones you already have, that's okay. You can do that. All right. Let's talk quick about bones. Chef, I didn't save that carcass and wings, right? That's something we hear a lot, and that's okay. You can go back out and get bones for this process. You have a couple of options. One, which is my first recommendation, is go buy another whole chicken so that you get practice breaking down the chicken again. Cut all the meat off that chicken and use the carcass and the wings. And if it comes with a neck, use the neck too, right? And throw that in your stock pot. So that's option one. Option two, if a whole chicken is not attainable, you can get just straight wings from the grocery store, and those will work. Because they have a higher ratio of bone to meat, don't worry about cutting the meat off the bones, right? I know we talked about the difference, but there's more bone than there is meat on a chicken wing usually. So it's not worth your time to carve all that meat off of there. What's great about the wings is that they're pretty much all joints, right? And then those tips are just straight cartilage. That's what we want in our stock, is that those joints and that cartilage. So wings will work. If you don't have the carcass and you're going to buy something to make stock and you don't want to buy a whole chicken, what I really like to do is get chicken feet, okay, from the grocery store. Usually I find them in the freezer section, like the frozen chicken at my grocery store. If you happen to live near an Asian market or like a Mexican meat market, they're definitely going to have chicken feet because they're more prevalent in those cuisines than they are in your standard everyday American household. They look crazy. They have little claws on them and stuff. Don't worry about trying to take those off. Don't try to get the meat off of these because they're pretty much all cartilage and skin. And that's why they make such beautiful chicken stock. Okay. Just a package of those, a pound or two, and you're going to be good. Also, generally speaking, they're really cheap because it's not something that a lot of people are buying, right? So if you can find chicken feet, that's a great option. If you want to up the chickenness of your chicken stock this week, that single carcass and 2 wings will do just fine in this gallon of chicken stock that we're making. But if you want to crank up the chickenness, go get another chicken and debone it, or add some more wings, or add some feet to your bones, and you can ramp up that chickenness to your stock. But if you've got the carcass and the wings, that'll do just fine here for this assignment, for that gallon of chicken stock that we're making. We got our cold bones in a pot. We filled them with cold water from the tap. We're going to put that over a burner, over medium high, maybe high heat. and try to bring that up to a boil as soon, and I mean as soon as you see that first big bloop, right? Turn that dial down to a simmer, all right? Depending on your stove, it's going to vary what simmer means. Maybe it's somewhere between 1 and 3 on the dial or the digital or whatever it is. But as soon as you hit that boil, it's got to drop down to a simmer. Because if you boil the stock, that convection that happens is going to make your stock very cloudy, because that's going to agitate the bones. It's going to really release the impurities that are in those bones and make your stock cloudy. It's still edible. You can still eat it. It's just not going to be quite as pretty in something like a minestrone soup that we're going to be making. All right. Now, as soon as you hit that boil and you're down to the simmer, you're going to notice some stuff coming to the top. It's affectionately referred to as scum because it is those impurities that are coming out of the bones. So what we want to do is have yourself a pot or a bowl off to the side and use a spoon or a ladle and skim that scum stuff off the top and just move it over into that bowl or pot on the side. That's going to go in the trash. We don't want any of that. The trick is getting just the foamy stuff and not the liquid underneath as best you can, okay? Once you've done that first skim and you're at a good simmer, now in goes your mirepoix, okay? Another fancy French word for us, M-I-R-E-P-O-I-X, mirepoix. What that means, generally speaking, is celery, onion, and carrots, okay? The traditional ratio is 2 parts onion, 1 part celery, 1 part carrots. Okay, so anytime you see mirepoix in a recipe, sometimes, in restaurants, they'll just call it pois. Depends on, where you're working and if they like to shorten stuff. But that's what that is. It's generally the basis for all stocks, soups, and sauces. We're going to use it 3 times this week, in fact. That's the standard, is the celery, onion, and carrot. A white mirepoix is something you might see. And in the quick video I had, I used a white mirepoix. And to do a white mirepoix, you replace the carrot with parsnips, which are basically just white carrots. And what that does is keeps that orange color from leaching into your stock or your soup or whatever it is you're making, and keeps it, really. And if you want to go like super white mirepoix, you replace the celery with celery root. And that's, celery is kind of a pale green celery root. Once you cut off all the outside, it is white. So then you got white onion, white celery root, and white parsnips. You can have a really, white stock. Don't break your back running all over town trying to find celery root and parsnips. Absolutely 100% celery, onion, carrot is totally fine. Okay? But if you stumble upon some parsnips, you're like, I've always seen these and I never knew what they were for. This is a great opportunity. And then those extra parsnips you have, absolutely eat just like carrots. So whatever you would put a carrot in a carrot, or if you want to use it for the rest of your recipes this week, you can do that as well. All right. That's the mirepoix. And then a variation on the mirepoix that I always like to talk about at this point is what's called the Trinity. The Trinity is something that is more popular in Cajun and Creole cuisine. What that is onion, celery, and bell pepper. And then the difference, a little bit of a difference, is that they're equal parts. There's not usually more onion than the other two, which is fantastic. If you were going to, in the future, you were going to make a stock that you were going to use to make like gumbo or something like that, you could go with Trinity instead of standard mirepoix to get a little more of that Cajun flavor into your final product as well. But this week, we're going to stick with that standard mirepoix or the white mirepoix. Another thing you're going to be adding to your stock is the sachet, right? We talked a little bit about this, I think in Bean Week. We talked about the sachet, or last week.
Last week. It went in the sauce.
In the sauce.
Actually, I think we talked about it twice. No, it was last week.
So the sachet, again, this is something, if you want to go super hardcore traditional French, you're going to wrap these ingredients in a piece of cheesecloth. If you have cheesecloth at home and you want to do that, great. If you don't worry about it. Because I will tell you that professionally, I have never put a sachet in cheesecloth in a stock. It's all getting strained out at the end, so we usually just throw it in there. When we're talking about a sachet, specifically the Super Very Classic in this stock, we're talking about peppercorns, thyme, and bay leaf. All right? So we want whole black peppercorns. If you've got that peppercorn melange at home, and it's got the white and the pink and all that stuff in there, that's totally fine to use with the peppercorns. When we talk about bay leaves, fresh or dry, those are interchangeable. You might use 2 dry bay leaves for every 1 fresh bay leaf, but there's specifically when we're talking about bay leaves, there's not that much difference. When we're talking about the thyme, we want to use either fresh thyme or dried thyme leaves. The one you want to try to avoid is ground thyme. Okay, the ground thyme will turn your stock like an army green color. It's going to taste the same. It's going to use the same. The technique is the same, but it's just a weird green color. If that's all you have and you don't want to go out and get the others, then go for it. But just know that instead of like a pale tan color, your stock is going to be green, straight up green.
Green.
If you use the ground thyme. Okay. As a rule, fresh and dried herbs, specifically in things like a stock, are pretty interchangeable. But what you want to remember is that the fresh herbs still have water content, right? Dried herbs obviously have been dehydrated, so all the water's gone. So on a 1-to-1, dried herbs have a much stronger flavor. So if you're going to go with the fresh herbs, which is great, you need 2 to 3 times the amount that you would for dried herbs. Okay? And that's just pretty standard across the board. If you're using the dried stuff, you use a little bit less. Using the fresh stuff, you need a little bit more. All right?
And this is where we talk about we're teaching technique. Mm-hmm. If the recipe says a teaspoon of thyme, put in a teaspoon of dried thyme. Is it too powerful? Okay, now you know next time, back it off. If it needs a little more, add a little more. If you're using fresh, go 1 teaspoon, see what it tastes like, make your necessary adjustments.
Yeah. And with the fresh ones, again, we're straining this out. If you just want to throw, the whole sprig of thyme in there, go for it. And it's going to be totally fine. Totally fine. All right. So we brought our water up to a simmer. We skimmed that scum. We're simmering. In went our mirepoix. In goes our sachet ingredients. Now we start the timer for 3 hours. All right. Chicken stock will simmer 3 hours to get the optimal amount of chicken flavor out of those bones. Okay. That's what's going to extract as much flavor, gelatin and collagen and all that stuff out of those bones as possible. If you go less than that, your stock is going to be very weak. If you start to go more than that, your vegetables are going to start to disintegrate. The bones will start breaking down, and so you'll get more impurities and more cloudiness and a more clunky, cluttered, muddled flavor in your stock. So really 3 hours is the key window of time. At that point, we're going to strain it out. Again, if you have some cheesecloth to help catch some of that stuff, great. I always just use 2 strainers. I have kind of a more coarse strainer and a finer strainer, and I just stack those on top of each other. And whatever the coarse one doesn't catch, the fine one does catch. That's the idea. If you've just got 1 strainer and you pour it through into a different container and you notice some floating thyme leaves or whatever, if you've got another little strainer or something, just try to scoop those out. If they make it through, it's not the end of the world. All right. We just don't want chunks of stuff floating there. So strain it out as best you can. Strain it, double strain it, strain it 1 time, then strain it a 2nd time, however you want to do it. Try to get as much stuff out of there as possible. Okay. And then it's critical to cool it down as quickly as possible. You've got a few options for this. The option that I like the best, because it's the most efficient and because it's the one you'll usually use in a professional kitchen, is an ice bath, okay? Now, we're talking about a gallon container. To do an ice bath, you put a container of hot something into a larger container of ice water, okay? So if we're talking about a gallon container, you may not have something that's big enough to fill with ice water to put that gallon container in. But you do, and that is your sink, okay? So if you need to use the sink, use the sink. Scrub it out real good so it's nice and clean. Don't put it in there with the dirty dishes, right? Put the plug in, dump your ice trays in there, put some water in, and then put your ice bath. You put your container of your hot stock in. But it doesn't mean that we just set it and wait till it gets cold, okay? Because if we think about it three-dimensionally, right? You've got, if it's a square container, right? You've got a cube now of hot liquid, right? All the stuff touching the sides is going to be touching the cold water, right? So it's going to start to cool off. But think about how long it's going to take for that cold to get all the way to the middle of that container, right? So we talked about the stir game last week with the tomato sauce, right? Again, we have an opportunity to play the stir game. Put a spoon or a ladle in your stock. Every time you walk by it, give it a stir. That way it swirls the cold water from the outside with the hot water on the inside, and it all helps cool itself as quickly as possible. All right? If an ice bath is simply not an option, you don't have a larger container, you don't have a sink big enough for your container, you can do one of two things. One, you could pour your stock into shallow dishes, like cake pans, or if you want to go to the dollar store and get one of those big foil roasting pans, right? You can pour the stock on that. The way that works is we're exposing more of the stock to the cooler air, and so it's going to help it cool it down a little bit faster, okay? The third option, this is my least favorite because it's the messiest and it has the most potential for disaster. But if it has to be your only option, then it has to be your only option. You can take a gallon Ziploc bag and fill it with ice and put it inside that container, okay, of whatever your stock is. What you have to remember is if your container is filled to the top and you go to put a gallon bag of ice in there, it's going to come over the top and overflow. So that's where it can get really messy, all right? The other thing that can happen is your bag can bust and you get a bunch of ice in your stock and now it's all watered down. You don't have to throw it away, but it's not as good as it would have been had that not happened, all right? As soon as your stock stops steaming, at that point you can go into the fridge with it, all right? Never, ever, ever, ever put anything that is steaming hot into your refrigerator, all right? That's going to raise the internal temperature of your refrigerator. It also can start flavoring everything in your fridge. It can create condensation in your fridge. And that's a super no-no as far as food safety standards go.
And you don't stick it in the freezer either for the same reason.
Right, same reason. Also, you don't want chicken stock slushy.
No.
Not yet, at least. And that's stock. Now, the technique you're doing this week, the recipe provided on the class page does walk you through the process and give you the ingredients for making white chicken stock. If you absolutely just really want to make a white veal stock or a white beef stock, then you are absolutely welcome to do so. If you have access to those bones or you want to go out and get those bones, then you are absolutely welcome to do so. What you should be aware of, though, veal stock has to simmer for 4 to 6 hours. Beef stock has to simmer for 6 to 8 hours, okay? Because the bones are bigger, right? Absolutely the exact same technique, start to finish. Cold water, bones, skim the scum, drop to simmer, add the mirepoix sachet, simmer. And during that 3-hour simmering process, or 5-hour or 7-hour, depending on what it is you're making, you still need to be skimming the scum periodically. You don't have to stand there the whole time and get every little chunk of foam that comes up, right? Just walk by there every 15, 20 minutes, give it a little skim, put that off to the side, go do something else, come back. Okay?
Check temperature, make sure you're not boiling.
Make sure you're not boiling, make sure you're just in a nice simmer, right? But make sure you're also simmering and not just sitting there. If it's just sitting there, then it's just steeping and not simmering, and we're not going to get as much flavor, all right? Once it's cooled down, if you're gonna go, if you're gonna be making, if you have room in your fridge for a gallon container, then slap a lid or some Saran wrap on it, stick it in the fridge, and save it till you're ready to make your soup and your sauce. If you don't have room, you can break it down into quart containers. Mason jars are great options as well. Another option is to use quart freezer bags, which is what I do at home when I make stock. Take the bag, write on there chicken stock, and write the date that you made it, right? And then you pour that cooled. It's much easier with the cold chicken stock, right? Pour that cold chicken stock into the container. Zip it real tight, right? And as you zip it, kind of squeeze as much air out as possible without squirting the stock out. And then lay it in your freezer flat, okay? So it lays flat. That'll do a couple things. One, it'll freeze it faster. Two, it'll take up less space in the freezer. Three, it will thaw faster when you're ready to use it, all right? So we want to try to lay things flat in the freezer when we freeze it, okay? Because when you make your soup, you're going to use like a quart of this. And when you make your sauce, you're going to use like another quart. So you're going to be left with another quart plus some leftover of stock. So you want to be able to store that for use later. So bagging it's the best way to store it in the freezer, for sure, because it just thaws the best and takes up the least amount of space. But you may have uses that you want to get straight to, and you can just leave it in the fridge. For about a week, you're going to be good with this fresh stock. Okay, if it's going to be longer than a week before you use it, you need to freeze
it. That ties us into our next step. And Chef Luke, you just said you plan ahead. You're going to probably need to do this the day before you do your soup and your stock, or your soup and your sauce. I'm sorry, because you need your stock to make your soup and sauce. So you can't try to pack this all into the same day. You can, but you need to do one first thing in the morning, and then you're going to spend all day in your kitchen if you're ready for that. So plan ahead.
Yeah, I mean, if you got nothing to do on Sunday and you want to get up and start making chicken stock in the morning, okay, go for it. But it's a long day. I highly recommend that you plan to do the stock on one day, on Friday or Saturday, and then make the soup and the sauce the next 2 days. And really, if you really want to break it down, the optimal schedule for this, and I know not everybody's life schedule fits into this, but the optimal schedule to do this is make your stock on Friday. That way on Saturday for lunch or dinner, you can have minestrone soup. And then on Sunday, you can use the velouté sauce to make something there. It can either be a sauce or it can turn into other stuff. Sorry about that.
Biscuits and gravy first thing in the morning.
Yeah, absolutely. So that would be the optimal schedule. I would go for it. So let's talk about soup. Now we're making soup. Real quick, we'll talk about the different classifications of soup. There's a pureed soup. There's cream of soups, right? Which is basically a puree plus cream or dairy product of some sort. You've got your bisques, which are made from shellfish, traditionally speaking. Now bisque is like a hot buzzword to use for any kind of pureed soup. I worked at a place, we served green tomato bisque. And technically, by the definition, is not bisque. Bisque is a soup made of shellfish using the crushed shells of the shellfish to thicken the soup. All right. But hey, if you can sell it for more money by calling it a bisque, go for it. Chowders, which are thick and chunky, usually contain potato and some sort of seafood, are another type. And then the type we're making this week is a clear soup. All right. A clear soup is a soup that uses a stock or a broth with stuff in it, which is exactly what we're doing this week. Real quick, I want to reiterate, your stock is not to be seasoned. No salt, all right? As much as you want to put salt in it, do not put salt in it. Stock is an ingredient that is going to be used, in your case, for a soup and a sauce. In a professional kitchen, who knows what that stock's going to become later on. You don't know necessarily all the time what it's going to be used for. So it's critical that you leave it unseasoned so that whatever it becomes can be seasoned appropriately. okay? So we leave it unseasoned. You're still going to taste it. You need to taste it and tell us what it tastes like, okay? It should taste like chicken, right? It's the one time it tastes like chicken is the okay answer, okay? But you should say it tastes like chicken, but it's bland.
Yeah,
perfect.
It's bland chicken. That's what I kind of want to hear.
Bland chicken, nailed it. You nailed it, perfect.
But I don't want to hear that about your soup or your sauce.
No.
Only stock.
Only the stock, yes. So the clear soup is what we're doing this week. You know, a common misconception about the food service industry is that soup, you know, soup of the day is just whatever we got laying around. We threw it in a pot, we heated it up, and we're trying to make some money on it, right? You know, that may be the unfortunate truth in some places, but it should never be the truth in your house or where you work. All right. Soups should always be built with purpose. Everything in the soup should be complementary to each other. Now, it is okay to use soup as an opportunity to get something out of the walk-in that we need to get rid of or that we have some extra pieces of, but it should still be mindfully created. It shouldn't just be all the random ends and bits. Okay. Same thing is true with stock. A lot of people, you know, I've seen kitchens where they have a stock box in the walk-in where they throw like all the onion papers and the celery, you know, the celery hearts and leaves and the carrot peels. No. Remember, your final product is only as good as the ingredients you use. Stock, being an ingredient, needs to be made with premium ingredients, right? And I don't mean go out and buy like the most expensive carrots you can find, but I mean the carrots should be cleaned and scrubbed before they go into the stock. Don't put the stem end in there. You know, don't put your onion papers in there. Celery hearts can be used, right? That bottom part that you usually cut off, but trim off the very root end. Get rid of that. That's dirty and gross, right? Trim as close as you can, so we're saving as much as we can, but don't use that stuff. That's not the purpose of a stock. A stock should be created with as much purpose and thoughtfulness as a soup, as something that you are going to give straight to a guest. Even though it's not going straight to a guest's plate or table, it's going in something else that is going to a guest's plate or table. So it should be treated as such. Let's jump back to soups. The main key to creating a really good soup is building layers of flavor, okay? Don't throw everything in the pot, fill it up with liquid, bring it to a simmer, and hey, I got some soup, right? It's not going to have any depth. It's going to be very one-dimensional. It's going to taste like a bunch of hot ingredients, and that's it. We want layers. When you take a bite of soup, you should, ooh, I got this one. Ooh, I got some of that. Ooh, I got some of that, right? There should be layers of flavor. And we do that by adding in the ingredients in stages, okay? So you want to think about it as a general rule, right? Excuse me. We're going to start with the harder ingredients. So for something like our minestrone soup, we're going to start with our mirepoix, our onions, our celery, our carrots. Out of everything that's going into this soup, those are the hardest things, and they take the longest to get nice and soft, right? So that's what we're going to start with. We're going to sweat our mirepoix. Again, throw in a little pinch of salt with that mirepoix and some olive oil. And we just want to get them started to translucent. Okay, we don't want to cook them all the way through at this point because they got a long way to go. We want to start to get them translucent because by the time the soup is finished, we should still be able to taste individual pieces of carrot and celery and onion. They shouldn't disappear in the soup. They should still be there, okay? Once those start to get translucent, in goes our chopped garlic and in goes our greens. The recipe calls for green cabbage. That is the traditional ingredient. Absolutely fantastic in this. But if you want to swap out that green for another hearty green, you're welcome to do so. In the quick video I made, I use kale. I like to use kale in my minestrone soup. You can use, something like chard, collard greens, mustard greens. Any really hearty green will be okay here. It's important to remove the stems, and it's important to slice them really thin. We do what's called a chiffonade cut. And that's where, you know, with cabbage, you can't really roll up the cabbage. You know, you just cut it like you're shredding, like you're making coleslaw or something. But if you're using greens like kale, collards, chard, take the stem out, roll it up, and then cut it across that roll to make those strips. And that's what's going to make them tender enough to eat and easier to pick up with a spoon than if you were to tear them in chunks or something. So we've sweated our mirepoix. In goes our garlic, our greens, and our zucchini. All right. We're going to sweat those for just a second. It really just takes a minute to get those to start to become translucent. And then in goes our canned diced tomatoes. All right. So again, the canned tomatoes are ideal because they've already been cooked and concentrated. Also, you're going to get some of that tomato juice that's in the can as well. You know, if you've got an absolute overabundance of fresh tomatoes coming out of your garden and you want to go fresh tomatoes on this one, it's not going to be a killer. It's not going to be a backbreaker. You're just not going to get as much depth into that. It's going to have a much lighter and fresher flavor, which is fine. It's a little less traditional because canned tomatoes are the tradition, but that will work okay in this particular case. In go the tomatoes, then in goes your homemade white stock. All right, so it's got to be done and ready to go. We're going to bring that up to a simmer. We're going to let it simmer for just a little bit, 15, 20 minutes. We want to get in there and taste, make sure our veggies are not mushy, but they shouldn't be raw and crunchy either. Should be starting to get there. At that point, in goes our cannellini beans. All right, cannellini beans, again, are the traditional ingredient. If you want to swap that out for a different white bean, that's fine. You know, great northern white beans, lima beans work too. You know, if red kidney beans is what you already have in the pantry, go for it. Here's what's important though. When you do use canned beans, and this is a perfect opportunity for using canned beans, you always want to drain them and rinse them, okay? Because canned beans last forever because of the goo that's on the beans, all right? There's lots of preservatives and salt and all that kind of stuff. We want to try to get that stuff off. We really want just to have those nice whole beans in there. They're convenient because they're cooked and ready to go. They just need to be reheated. But we want them to be an ingredient in this, not all the other stuff that's in that can as well, okay? So dump those in a strainer, give them a quick rinse, and then right into the pot with your soup. We only need those to be in there long enough to warm back up. At that point, we're going to taste our soup. We're going to season it with salt and pepper until it's right where we want it. Remember, we talked a few weeks ago about when we're doing reduction, right? The water comes out, but the salt doesn't. So especially on something like a soup and a sauce, you want to do the seasoning, the aggressive seasoning, at the very, very end. Okay, because if you season it aggressively at the beginning, as the water evaporates out, the salt won't. The salt will just concentrate and get salty. We don't want it to be salty. We want the salt to enhance the flavors of everything else. All right, so our aggressive seasoning is done right there at the end. Then we're going to ladle that soup over pasta that we've already cooked. All right, the traditional pasta is called ditalini. They're little tiny short cylinders. They can be difficult to find. So if you want to use elbow macaroni, penne pasta, you can use farfalle, the bow ties, right? That one works fine. You know, even rigatoni is okay. But we want to use short, small pastas because remember, we're eating this with a spoon. So think about trying to pick up, you know, some beautiful white beans and mirepoix and zucchini with spaghetti noodles hanging off, right? That's hard to do with a spoon. So nice short pasta, that's what we want, so that we can get everything on a spoon, on a bite together. I recommend that there are recipes out there where you can cook the pasta in the soup, and that's okay. I mean, that's a little more traditional. However, what happens is that pasta absorbs your beautiful stock, and your soup becomes a little less soupy and a little more saucy, right? Because also that starch will come out into the soup and thicken it up a little bit. which is not exactly what we want to happen in our final product. Also, if you're a fan of leftover soup, which I am, right? It's one of the few things I really like to eat leftover because it gets better the next day, right? If you cook them, what's that?
Those flavors, they marry as they hang out and cool and then reheat.
Absolutely. But if you cook the pasta in the soup and then you try to leave it left over the next day, that pasta is going to continue to absorb the liquid in that soup. And then the next day, you're really not going to have that much liquid left. So that's why I like to cook the pasta separately and have that available. You can cook it ahead of time. You know, you can cook it while you're doing the soup process. Either way, it's fine. Ladle that pasta into the bowl, then ladle the soup over that. And then you can stir and mix it together. It's perfect. Perfect. And then we're going to garnish it with some fresh chopped parsley and some of that wedge grated Parmesan cheese, or Grana Padano, Asiago, Romano, any of those cheeses. And that's the minestrone soup. Guys, it's fantastic. I know it's not exactly starting to cool off everywhere in the country just yet, but trust me, get this one down this week, and then in a month from now, when the leaves start changing and the temperature starts dropping everywhere but Texas, you can have a nice warm bowl of soup as it starts to cool off, okay? If you find yourself looking at this recipe and going, oh my good golly, that's a lot of ingredients and cash is a little tight this week, please message me and Chef Jackie and we'll help you tighten up a little bit. We can also help you find some substitutions and that sort of stuff at need, okay? But don't wait to ask me on Tuesday, because on Tuesday it's too late. I can't do anything for you, all right? So reach out as soon as you can.
With the pasta, I happened to be wandering through my grocery store the other day, and they have ditalini. They call it salad macaroni where I'm at. So check for that. You might not see it as ditalini, but you might see it as salad macaroni. I saw it at Safeway for 88 cents last week for a pound box. So that's and I've also seen it as ditalini back east, but here in Arizona, salad macaroni. So check for that.
Nice.
If you're looking for those little ones.
That's a good tip for sure. And the soup is great, you guys. I'm really excited for you to if you've only ever had this canned, then you are in for a big time treat. This is a much fresher and more texturally pleasant version. Actually, before I got into culinary school, I was not a big fan of soup because my only soup experience had been growing up eating canned soups. Canned soups absolutely have their place. There's absolutely a time when a canned soup is a go-to, right? When you're feeling like really awful and you just need some Campbell's chicken noodle soup, right? Not knocking it, but when you start making soups from scratch and you start doing it in layers and building those layers of flavor and using things like homemade chicken stock, oh my gosh, you guys, it's a whole nother level of comforting soup, especially when you've done the work and you've put it in there. Soups are excellent for chefs to have on their menu because they can be put together relatively inexpensively. Now, you can go out and make super expensive soups, absolutely. But if you're planning ahead and if you're using what you have on hand to make those soups, from your perspective, from a chef's perspective, it's an opportunity to be creative and make some great flavors, but also to make something that can be very profitable for you. From a guest perspective, a soup is usually a really easy value add-on, right? A cup of soup, $2, $3, $4, you know, whatever it is. It's like, yeah, sure, yeah, give me a cup of soup, right? It's an easy value add for them. They feel like they're getting a good deal. Soup is very comforting for most people, right? It makes you think about when you were a kid, you were sick, and your mom and dad brought you some soup, right? It brings up good memories for most people. So it's really beneficial for both you and your diners. So it's something that's important that you really know how to develop those layers of flavor and take your time and use great ingredients. The last thing we're going to make is our velouté sauce this week. This is another one of those mother sauces, all right? This is one, I love it because every time we do this, you know, it sounds very fancy, right? It's French, velouté, right? It's a mother sauce. Ooh, by Escoffier, it's a big deal, right? It's chicken gravy, you guys. when you go to actually make this, you're going to go, Chef, I make something just like this every Thanksgiving, right? It's flour and fat, and then we add some stock, and we make a gravy. That's exactly what velouté sauce is, okay? We talked about different ways to thicken our sauces last week. This week, we're thickening by using a roux, R-O-U-X, okay? That is another fancy French word. What roux is equal parts fat and flour by weight, okay? That's what's important. Remember, we talked about fat, and in this case, we're talking about butter. The recipe calls for clarified butter, and if you got a wild hair and you want to go out and make some clarified butter, go for it. But I'll tell you, you could get exactly the same result by just using regular whole butter. Unsalted real butter, right? Remember, that's what we're talking about. But remember, it's got to be equal parts by weight, fat and flour, all right? When we're talking about roux in general, you can use vegetable oil, you can use canola oil. Don't use olive oil. It gets very bitter. But you can also use animal fats. Duck fat, great. Bacon fat works, absolutely, perfectly. But remember, the bacon fat has sugar and salt in it, so you have to adjust for that accordingly. But I use bacon fat to make biscuits and gravy all the time if I don't make sausage gravy. So it works 100% of the time. Equal parts by weight, fat and regular old all-purpose flour. When you mix them together and start heating them up, usually you'll melt the fat and then add in the flour. Mix those together. It should have the consistency of wet sand, okay, when mixed together. And then you know that you got your ratio correct, all right? Roux takes on several stages. First, there's white roux, and that's where we basically just melt the fat, add the flour, and then go to the next step, all right? You would use a white roux in a bechamel sauce. So if you've ever made cream gravy, right? Fat, flour, whisk together, add some milk, cook it till it's thick, right? That's cream gravy, but that's also bechamel sauce, okay? That's another classic French mother sauce. We're not gonna make that one in this class. You've probably made it. It's very similar to this one. It's a little bit faster, different ingredients. But that's the bechamel. And that's what you would use a white roux for. We're going to be using a blonde roux, okay? And blonde's, probably from its French origins, it makes more sense. From us, you think blonde, you think yellow hair, but it's going to be more of a tan color. A very, very pale tan color is where your roux should get to before you add in your liquid, all right? In this particular case, that's a blonde roux we're going to be using. The next step would be a brown roux, and really brown roux takes on several stages in itself. It can go everywhere from like peanut butter color to dark chocolate color, and those brown roux would be used for something like a sauce espagnole, where you would make a brown roux and then add brown stock. So something like a beef gravy, right? That's a brown roux. A gravy you might have with like a chopped steak or something like that, a mushroom gravy. Usually has brown gravy. That's an espagnole sauce. You would also use, that dark chocolate brown roux is what you usually use for things like gumbo and etouffee, right? Because you want that really deep depth of flavor. But we're working with blonde roux for our velouté sauce. So you'll get your fat and your flour mixed together. You cook it just a little bit, and then in goes your liquid, your homemade chicken stock in this particular case. All right. You'll notice in the recipe that mirepoix is called for, and in the video, I use mirepoix as well. But here's the deal. Your stock already has mirepoix in it. So if you just want to go roux and stock, go for it. Because those same sachet ingredients, those same mirepoix ingredients are already in the stock. All right, so in this particular week, we can give you a pass on that if you want. Hey, you may already have all the mirepoix ingredients and all the sachet ingredients, and if you want to bump up that flavor even more, go for it. Throw them in there. That's great. But if you want to get a little quicker this week, you can go straight from roux, stock, cook it till it's thick, and you're done. Season and adjust. Okay. We're gonna add that when you're adding your stock. to your roux, you want to whisk it in to keep it. If you've ever made gravy that ended up clumpy, right? That's a couple reasons. One, you added, you just dumped in the liquid and didn't whisk it very well, or your liquid was cold when you added it. Hot liquid will help incorporate the roux into the liquid. Okay. The way that roux actually works is that the starch in the flour blooms in the liquid, but to get that to happen, we have to coat the flour. And what happens on almost like a molecular level is that the flour granules get coated in fat, and that allows them to separate from each other and then to bloom in the liquid and to thicken your liquid, right? So that's why you want to make sure your roux is really well whisked together, and then you want to whisk as you're adding in your hot liquid. All those things help you to ensure or give you a much smaller chance of having clumps in your sauce or your gravy. Okay. Once you get that in there, you're going to simmer it, excuse me, until it is the sauce consistency that you want. Nappe is the minimum. Remember, we talked about nappe consistency, where you dip a spoon in, you run your finger on the back of the spoon, and that line holds. That's nappe consistency. So that's your minimum. If you get it to there, you've got a sauce. Okay. That sauce can be used just like any other sauce from right then and there. You can just spoon it over, you know, a nice sauteed chicken breast or a sauteed pork chop would be great. You know, those are some traditional uses for it. At that point, you could also use it as a soup if you wanted to. You know, you could put some shredded chicken or some vegetables or something in there, and you've got a nice little velouté soup. If you want to cook it down a little more and thicken it up a little bit, then you can use it as like I said in the video, any way you would use a cream of chicken soup, because it's basically what you've made just without any cream in it. So if you wanted to make like a chicken pot pie, this would be, you know, thicken it up a little bit, and that's your sauce for it. Or like a King Ranch chicken casserole is a great option to use for this as well. All right. The velouté sauce is not my favorite to store because when you freeze it and then bring it back, it breaks almost every time, meaning that it just kind of separates into flour and fat and liquid. So I'd prefer to use this one just kind of right away if you can. It'll store for a week in your fridge if you want to use it as sauce every day for a week or whatever on your chicken breasts as you eat dinner and stuff like that. But that's the ideal use. So make your roux, add your stock, and then season and taste. If you are going to use the mirepoix, which you're welcome to, again, I would do your butter and then saute your mirepoix in that butter, then add the flour and stir, then add the stock and stir. Then you would add in the sachet ingredients, and then you would strain it out. So again, those flavors are already in the stock that are going into the velouté sauce, but if you want to boost those flavors even more, then you can add those in there and then strain it out so that you have it that extra flavor in there. And that's week 5. It's a bear as far as time is concerned. So it's absolutely critical that you carve out time to get that stock done so that you have it ready to do the other 2 things, right? Because if you don't start your stock till Tuesday, you're not going to be on time. It's impossible. I mean, unless you start at 7 a.m. on Tuesday morning and you got all day off and nothing to do but cook, well then maybe you can make it. But it's easier on you. You know, another reason we try to lay this stuff out for you guys and we try to push you to submit as early as possible is to relieve some stress, right? This is already very stressful, right? You've all got jobs and families and life outside of the school, right? Then you've all got all your reading materials and your knowledge checks. Sometimes you have discussion forums. Then you've got all the assignments, right? It's all very stressful. So as much stress as you can alleviate for yourself is ideal. And by working earlier in the week, starting your assignments, start thinking about it today. I saw some people already turned in today. That's fantastic. I do like you to watch the live session for all the tips and tricks and make sure you're getting everything just right. But if you're going to be super early, go for it. But the earlier you're turning it in, the less stress you have towards the end of the week. For those of you who have scrambled to get it turned in 11:55 p.m. on Tuesday, it's a scramble, right? And it's kind of makes your back tight. But you know what? If you start turning it in on Monday, there's not as much rush. It's more relaxing. You can enjoy the process a little bit more. And when you enjoy the process more, you get more out of it. Absolutely. I don't think there's any way to argue against that, for sure. I had a few people ask me last week about discussion forums. We do not have a graded discussion forum this week. We do not have another graded discussion forum until week number 7. Okay. So don't worry about that. You've got research material. You've got knowledge checks. This week we added in the conversion checks. All right. I want to show you that real quick on the class page where that is. So you got your research material, you got your knowledge check, and then you have a conversion knowledge check. Okay. These are little, I hate to say math quizzes because that freaks people out, but that's essentially what they are. They're going to vary from week to week between converting cups to gallons to ounces. You're going to start talking about portions. You have this much chicken. How many 3-ounce portions can you get out of that? And that kind of stuff. So there's some multiplication, there's some division, that kind of stuff. Don't be a hero. Use a calculator. Use a conversion chart. We absolutely encourage and recommend that you do so. I had some people actually send me, Chef, will this conversion chart work? Absolutely. Let's see. I will get our conversion charts up here for you. I'll put them in the Ask Your Questions here so that you guys can check them out. But it really is, if you want to get started on those ahead, it really is as simple as just, conversion charts. And then pull that up, and you can go to images. And there's all.
Don't pay for one.
What's that?
Don't pay for one.
No, don't pay for one. Don't pay for one. No.
Don't buy one.
Look, all these that are up here are just right down here, right below. If you really want to go for it, check out old Gallon Man.
I would say Chef Luke, my favorite Gallon Man.
So Gallon Man will haunt your dreams, but he will also teach you about conversions.
If you have kids, you may very well have seen this once or twice.
Yeah. So 1 gallon is 4 quarts, is 8 pints, is 16 cups, right? And it all just comes out from there. So use those conversion charts, use calculators. Again, don't be a hero. Nobody expects you to memorize all this stuff off the bat. When you're in an actual kitchen and you need to make conversions, you will pull out your phone and use a calculator, right? Absolutely, go for it. And again, just like a regular knowledge check, you can take those over and over again until next Tuesday, and the best grade you get will stick. So no sweat. There's no test stress there. Don't freak out about that. You take it over and over again. This particular week, we actually also have a sanitation knowledge check. So there's 3 knowledge checks this week. So make sure you're getting all of those done. No discussion forums, so don't worry about that. And then you've got your 3 assignments. So a lot to do again. Excuse me. To make sure that we have it all done by next Tuesday. It's all about planning and time management. To get there, though, if you're thinking to yourself, how am I going to make this happen? Shoot me or Chef Jackie a note. Say, hey, here's my work schedule. Here's some other stuff I have to do between now and next Tuesday. How do I fit all this in? And we will put a schedule together for you. I would love to do that for you. I'd be happy to. Now, it may mean that you have to sacrifice a TV show, or you got to watch that recorded instead of live or something like that. But that's, those are the kind of sacrifices you got to be prepared to make. Not only to finish this program, but to be successful in this industry. right? You rarely get to do the things you want to do when you want to do them. You got to figure out how they work around the rest of your schedule. So, but we'd be happy to do that for you and happy to help out. Okay. Again, though, don't send me an email on Tuesday. Chef, how do I fit this all in today? You don't? That's my answer. So think ahead and look forward to make sure that you're being as successful as possible in this program. All right. Everybody wave to those watching the recording. Thank you guys for watching the recording. We appreciate it. Thank you guys who were able to make it live this evening. We appreciate that as well. As always, if you have any questions about your specific assignments and your grades on those assignments, reach out to Chef Jackie. If you have questions about the program, the industry, food in general, reach out to me. If you have any life issues and you need to talk to somebody for some resources, reach out to your student success coach. Any technical issues with your device or our website, contact the student support number at the very bottom of every class page. And we thank you guys very much. As always, reach out with all those questions as soon as possible so we can help you out as soon as possible. All right?